All right, today we're talking about Roald Amundsen, and we're going to deconstruct the method of a man who looked at polar exploration completely differently. For him, it wasn't some heroic struggle. No, it was a problem to be solved with meticulous, careful design.
So let's just jump right in. When I say polar explorer, what's the first image that pops into your head? Is it, this romantic idea of a hero, someone struggling against impossible odds, battling the elements with nothing but pure grit and endurance?
Well, for Roald Amundsen, the guy who conquered both the Northwest Passage and the South Pole, that kind of suffering wasn't heroic at all. In his mind, it was just a sign of failure, a sign of poor planning.
So let's dig into this. Because to really get Amundsen, you have to understand how his entire mindset was forged to completely reject this popular idea of heroic failure.
Okay, so check this out. From a super young age, Amundsen was just different. He's a teenager when he reads about the doomed Franklin expedition, and you know what his reaction is? He's not horrified by the tragedy. No, he's inspired. Inspired to master the very suffering that destroyed those men. This is a guy who would sleep with his windows wide open in the middle of a Norwegian winter just to condition himself. And then when his mother dies, he was supposed to be a doctor, right? He quits medical school that day to become a seaman. Every single move was just cold, calculated, and ruthlessly focused on one thing: mastering the poles. You see, for Amundsen, his first expeditions were basically his university. And the main subject? Failure. He learned what to do by watching, very closely, everything that could possibly go wrong.
Take the Belgica expedition. This was his first real taste of Antarctica, and man, it was a total disaster. The ship gets trapped in the ice for an entire year. The crew is just falling apart, crippling depression, scurvy, it's a nightmare. But while everyone else is just trying to survive, Amundsen is watching. He's learning. He sees the American doctor on board, Frederick Cook, start forcing the crew to eat fresh seal and penguin meat. Now, to the Europeans, this was probably horrifying, but guess what? It worked. It saved their lives. And right there, Amundsen learns this absolutely critical lesson. Local knowledge wasn't just some quaint custom. It was superior to the flawed traditional European methods.
And this idea, this philosophy of learning from the experts on the ground, it really hit its peak when he went for the Northwest Passage. See, Amundsen didn't just sail through. He stopped, and he lived with the Nutsillik Inuit for 2 years. He wasn't just a tourist. He was a student. And he realized that their way of life wasn't just primitive skills. It was advanced technology, perfectly adapted to the environment. So out went the heavy European wool, and in came layered animal skins that actually manage moisture. He mastered dog sledding, which is just way, way more efficient than men hauling their own gear. He even learned how to build igloos, which are so much better than a freezing canvas tent. And here's the key. He didn't just borrow these ideas. He integrated them into his system with, frankly, lethal efficiency. So you see how this is all building, right? All these lessons he's learned from his own mistakes, from the Inuit. It's all about to come together in probably the most famous race in the history of exploration. So Amundsen's all set to go for the North Pole, right? Plans are made, everything's in motion, and then boom, news breaks that somebody else already claimed it. For most people, that's the end, but not for Amundsen. He makes this incredibly ruthless pivot. He doesn't tell his crew, doesn't tell his financial backers. He just secretly redirects the entire expedition south. And only when he's well on his way does he send this short, now legendary telegram to his rival, Robert Falcon Scott. The race was on. And you have to understand, this race to the South Pole, it wasn't just 2 guys racing to a spot on a map. No, it was a clash of 2 completely different philosophies of exploration. On one side, you have Amundsen the professional. For him, this was a logistical problem, a puzzle to be solved. The mission was simple: get to the pole and get back alive. That's it. On the other side, you have Scott the hero. For him, and for the British Empire, this was a grand quest, an epic journey to be endured for national prestige. And you can see these 2 philosophies in literally every single choice they made. Look at the breakdown. Amundsen used what he had learned worked. Inuit sled dogs, Inuit-style fur clothing. Scott? He brought ponies that couldn't handle the conditions and died, experimental motor sleds that just broke down, and then they were left with man-hauling. Just men pulling their own heavy sledges. It was brutal. Amundsen's team were all expert skiers, gliding over the snow. Scott's team mostly walked. These aren't small things, These details were the difference between life and death. And this is the thing. The race wasn't won on that final push to the pole. It was won months before, in the planning, in the science of supply.
Amundsen's team laid depots, sure, but they marked them with black flags for miles on either side, making them impossible to miss, even in a blizzard. They packed 3 times the amount of food they thought they'd need. And this one is just incredible. He had every single fuel can soldered shut. Why? Because he knew fuel could evaporate in the extreme cold. It was a known problem. Scott's team didn't do this, and that one tiny detail, it turned out to be absolutely fatal for them.
And the result of all that preparation? 34 days. That was the gap. Amundsen's team arrives at the pole on December 14th, 1911. They're in good shape, they're well fed, they actually hang out for 3 days taking measurements, making sure they're at the exact spot. Then, 34 days later, Scott's exhausted, freezing party finally stumbles to the pole, only to find a Norwegian flag already flying. The race was over. The game had already been won. But here's where the story takes a really strange turn. When the world finds out that Scott and his men died tragically on the journey back, the whole narrative just flips. The British establishment, they couldn't just accept that they'd been outplanned and outmaneuvered. So Scott, the man who failed, is transformed into this national martyr. His tragic end is reframed as a noble, heroic sacrifice. And Amundsen's perfectly executed professional victory, well, that was suddenly seen as unsporting, almost like he cheated by being too prepared. And nothing captures this attitude better than this quote. At a dinner that was supposed to be honoring Amundsen's achievement, the president of the Royal Geographical Society, Lord Curzon, stands up and proposes a toast. To the dogs. It was such a thinly veiled insult, a way of saying, you didn't win, your animals did. It completely dismissed the years of planning, the learning, the human skill, the entire architectural genius behind the victory. You know, it's easy to just think of Amundsen as a racer, but he was so much more than that. After the South Pole, his focus really shifted away from just planting flags. He wanted to push the boundaries of polar science. His next huge project was the Maud expedition. Now, the ship itself, the Maud, it never actually completed its main goal of drifting across the Arctic. But from a scientific standpoint, it was a monumental success. That ship was basically a floating laboratory for 7 years. It gathered this incredible, unprecedented amount of data on everything you can imagine. Earth's magnetic field, tide levels, upper air winds. It basically laid the groundwork for modern oceanography. In his last years, Amundsen became obsessed with the sky, with aviation. I mean, there's this one insane story where he crash lands his seaplane on the ice near the North Pole, and his crew spends 3 weeks literally carving a runway out of the ice so they can take off again. And they did. He eventually did cross the North Pole, but in an airship. But his ending, it's the most Amundsen thing ever. It's a testament to his strange, complex code of honor. In 1928, he gets on a rescue plane to go look for another airman, an Italian guy named Umberto Noble, whose airship had crashed. The thing is, Amundsen openly despised Noble, but he went to rescue him anyway. The plane vanished over the Barents Sea. Amundsen's body was never found. He died trying to save his rival.
So, after all that, what is the legacy of this incredible, complicated man? It really all boils down to one single, incredibly powerful idea.
In this quote right here, this is the whole thing in a nutshell. Victory awaits him who has everything in order. Luck, people call it. Defeat is certain for him who has neglected to take the necessary precautions in time. This is called bad luck. He just didn't believe in luck. For him, good luck was just a lazy word people use for meticulous preparation. And bad luck? Well, that was just another word for negligence. And his influence is so much bigger than just old maps. It's literally in the DNA of almost every complex, high-stakes thing we do today. You look at the design of a modern Antarctic research base like the Amundsen Scott Station, that's his logistical model. You look at how he planned long-duration space missions to Mars, that's his thinking on nutrition, psychology, and technical redundancy. His focus on preparation over brute force is basically the foundation of risk management in any serious field. So what Amundsen really did was prove that with enough preparation, with the right method, no frontier is truly impossible. He completely changed our relationship with the harshest environments on our own planet. Which kind of leaves us with a final big question, doesn't it? If his methods could conquer the absolute extremes of Earth over 100 years ago, what new extremes, what new frontiers could they help us conquer today?